Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BuzzStream Podcast. My name is Nero, and today I am joined by Abi Bennetts, who is the Digital PR Director at PropellerNet. Abi, thanks so much for joining us here today. I'm super glad that you could pop on.
No worries at all. Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to chat.
Abi, I think I became aware of you in the space. Maybe it was 3 or 4 years ago. This was probably when I was still with Siege Media, and you had a newsletter called Work in PRgress, could say. It was a great newsletter. It was kind of like a roundup of all the cool digital PR campaigns going on. And sadly, to hear that, I think the newsletter has kind of fallen to the wayside. It's maybe a work in progress again.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. I set up the newsletter in sort of COVID times. So when we went into the pandemic, and I was kind of quite early on in my digital PR career, I'd say, and just loved looking at all things like campaign. Was really sort of enjoying networking with other SEOs and digital PRs in the space, and just felt like, we were all locked in our apartments and stuff. I had the extra time
Yeah.
to sort of share that with people. So yeah, that's where it kind of started from. And then it sort of grew from there. But to be honest, since then, sort of other commitments have come up. And also there's so many great newsletters in the industry right now. I know there's The Grapevine by Iona Townley, I think, which is amazing. And she sort of pulls together a big list of campaigns. There's another PR newsletter, which I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but by Thea, which is another great newsletter. So just felt like, yeah, other people were kind of doing it really well. But I still
Yeah,
have this
I
like
think that's the PR Insider. Sorry to
PR
Is that
insider. Yeah,
right? Yeah. Okay.
perfect.
I
Yeah,
just
that's
subscribe to
it.
that as well. So
Amazing. Yeah,
I'll make sure
thank
I look
you.
at that.
It's a really good newsletter. So yeah, it kind of feels like I still have that sort of like passion, still want to do something where I'm kind of like delving into cool campaigns and chatting to people. But how I sort of formulate that is to be confirmed. So as you said, a work in progress. We'll see what it ends up being.
Yeah. I feel like I was kind of in a similar spot when I was working with Siege, where I was just like, this is such cool content, and like being able to see what other people are doing in the space is so inspiring.
Yeah.
Um, and I want to really kind of dig into that and kind of how you've used other content to inspire your own. But let's kind of step back a little bit, because I think one of the things that we talked about was kind of this idea of content in boring industries. And, it's something that every digital PR, every content creator, especially an agency, will run into at some point.
Yeah.
And we're not here, Abby and I aren't here to call out any industries specifically and say that you're boring. People that know they're boring are boring. Um, but I do feel like it's worth playing this quick little game of what do you think is the most boring industry that you've ever created content for?
Ooh. Hmm. That is a good
If it
and
helps, I can go first. Do you want
yeah.
me
You
to go
go
first?
first. Yeah. You
Okay.
can go first.
Okay. So there's this thing, and I don't know if this is in the UK at all, but it's called a surety bond.
Okay.
Um, and that was probably the hardest thing. So geez, I worked on this client for like a year and a half, and still not sure if I know exactly what it is. I think it's basically like a contract between contracts, essentially, so
Right.
that like, it's like a three-way contract where like a centralized contract will make sure that other person kind of uphold the agreement.
Yeah.
Um, so you can get a surety bond, is like an insurance in your contract almost.
Okay. Yeah.
I hope I'm not totally mangling this. I guess I could go back and edit this. But anyway, it was really tough. We say boring, but like ultimately it just comes down to like a really tough market, a challenging
Yeah.
market to come up with.
Yeah.
So yeah, what do you got? Do you have any off the top of your head?
Yeah, I think the one that I do talk about a lot, just because it blows my mind how creative we can sort of be with it, is one of our clients who are a scrapyard comparison service. So they help people to
Wow.
find the best scrapyard near them that's going to give them a good deal when their car is ready to be sent to the scrap heap. So something that I personally know or knew nothing about previous to working on them. But whenever someone sort of asks who one of my favorite clients to work on is, they're normally up there on the top of the list because we just do
Ah,
such creative and cool work with them. And, we work with some great household brands in, typically exciting spaces, but they're actually one of the more fun sometimes because, there's sort of so much scope to do what weird and wonderful stuff with them. So yeah, I'd say them.
yeah. Yeah. Well, cool. Let's get into it because I think there's some really cool stuff we can talk about here with challenging kind of boring industries.
Yeah.
Um, I think one of the ones that you had called out on your site was a home valuation website. Sorry, not on your site, on Twitter. Um, it was a home valuation website, and I think what you did that was really interesting was kind of connect this home valuation website to Christmas.
Mhm.
So I think it was like cleaning products for cleaning up pine needles.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah. Yeah.
do you find that that's the easiest kind of first solution to like finding a tough industry to work in is just kind of taking a step out of the initial industry and trying to see how to connect the dots?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a tough one. I think you should always sort of focus on the sort of niche itself and almost try and sort of magnify in on that first to see what there is to play with. Because I think a lot of the time you can sort of approach a brand and sort of be like, well, this isn't that interesting. There might be not a lot to play with. But actually, when you sort of really zoom into what they're trying to achieve or how they're servicing their sort of audiences or their customers, there normally is more than expected that you can sort of play with and sort of build ideas from. But if you've done that and then you're still thinking like, oh God, this is going to be really tricky, then yeah, definitely taking a step back. And I think thinking about their sort of audience in a wider sense. So with the example you gave, the client basically offer a service that when people are ready to sell their house, they can go to this business and they can basically compare different house prices in their area. They can see how quickly houses are selling. They can compare estate agents. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop for anyone who's looking to sell their house. So the kind of thinking with the strategy behind that story is that, okay, these audiences are going to be thinking about selling their houses. They're probably going to be having people to viewing their house so that they can sell it. So what are they going to be thinking about when they're preparing their house for a viewing? Well, if they're doing it at Christmas, they're going to be wanting to clean those little pine needles, which go everywhere. I don't know if you've had a real Christmas tree before. They
Yeah,
literally go
yeah,
everywhere.
yeah.
It's insane. So kind of thinking about that sort of experience and trying to tap into that and provide some sort of useful content around that, because that's sort of making that client then the one-stop shop for literally everything that you could think of when you're selling your house. So yeah, I think that was a nice example of where we did go a little bit broader, but actually it still kind of tied back to that core messaging of the brand. And obviously we knew it was a story that was going to hit well with journalists. So it kind of ticked all the boxes there.
Yeah, you said a couple interesting things there, the beginning of like kind of the start of the process, and I want to dig into that. So,
Yeah.
it sounds like you kind of looked into the kind of sub services that the brand offers and kind of use that as a jumping off point. Does that sound right? I feel like that's great advice for people that are kind of overwhelmed. If you're in just like a general insurance brand or something, it's like there's probably something smaller you can jump into.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, looking into sort of the subtopics, and also kind of, I think a real key thing which helps me to think about this for all clients, but particularly boring or tricky clients as well, is to kind of be thinking about what that audience is experiencing when they're going to that business. So, what are their pain points? What are they kind of thinking? Why are they going to that business? Because then there's a whole sort of new world of different things that you can into that you can sort of talk about that are going to be relevant to that audience. So you can kind of go a bit broader without going too far away from what their ideal customer is going to be searching for or looking for. So yeah, that's kind of how I like to think about it.
Yeah, I love that advice. And is that something you asked the client for? Like, what are the pain points, or is that part of your research and taking on a new client?
Yeah, definitely. So when we onboard a client, we have sort of like almost like a briefing questionnaire. that we'll send to clients, which has a lot of getting insight from them on who their audience is, from their perspective, what their audience are experiencing, all those different sort of insights that are really going to help us when it comes to our briefing sessions, so that we can brief the team on, this is what this business is serving and why they're doing what they're doing, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super helpful. And I think that's definitely something that I remember when we implemented that, as a formalized, workflow for taking on a new client.
Yeah.
I feel like that's invaluable. Another thing I think that I've tried personally is like looking at customer service team, like chat. I remember in my
Mhm.
previous, was a brief stint in-house, and and I've done this with BuzzStream too now, of like looking at talking to the customer service teams to kind of see those pain points. Have you ever worked on anything like that?
Yeah, no, I haven't personally, but I think that's a great tip. And I think something we kind of do, which is kind of a similar tactic, sort of thinking along the same lines, is like using tools such as like also ask and answer the public and stuff like that, again,
Mhm.
to kind of tap into like what those consumers are experiencing, what they're sort of searching around, so what they're searching for help around, those sort of problems and pain points that they're experiencing through that journey to then reach our client business. But yeah, I think that's a great tip, talking to the customer service team if you can.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Okay, so there was another one I want to talk about that I saw on your Twitter,
Oh yeah.
where it was like I think it was like a comparison site, right? Like they did home loans, energy
Okay.
plans, um, and you were able to, so like kind of like a grab bag, right?
Yeah.
Of like a large umbrella, and
Yeah.
you were able to tie it to Spotify playlist.
Yeah.
So, walk us through kind of the connections there and maybe how you ideated that, because that's an interesting, to me, it's like, if I break it down an idea, these are the core parts, and like, let's see how they kind of come together.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that, we would normally typically work on like a subsection of that product offering. To say they're a comparison site for like lots of different insurances or whatever, or say energy plans. Can't remember which specifically campaign and client this one was, but we would work on that particular product and sort of niche down from there. And then, yeah, I think one of the tricky things when you're working on those sort of niche, less creative industry, should we say, is then trying to find something that's going to be engaging to journalists. So a really easy way to do that is to then tie it and like pair it with something that is really sort of well known and creative
Mhm.
and something that's really fun. So something like a Spotify playlist, which obviously everyone's super familiar with. There's lots of different fun stories you can draw from seeing, which songs and artists are appearing the most on different playlists and stuff like that. So actually then tying those things together then makes the topic of whatever sub product we were focusing on in that particular occasion to be way more fun and engaging for audiences and journalists. So it's something we do think about a lot in terms of like, okay, so we've got this like niche topic. How can we then tie that into something fun like Netflix or Spotify playlists or Disney characters or whatever that sort of other fun thing might be? Because then you sort of open up the possibilities of fun stories around that topic.
Yeah, yeah. I was just trying to see if I could pull up the actual piece that I was referring to, 'cause I'm totally blanking on what exactly it was. But I mean, I think, yeah, that's kind of the universal advice regardless. I think
Yeah.
the thing that I wanted to get into with highlighting some of those is, because I remember getting this a lot from clients and from, people in the industry, of like the content relevant thing. So
Yeah.
like, how far is too far away? If you do find yourself in a tough industry, you're thinking about, okay, maybe I'll take a step back from center.
Yeah.
How do you, Abby, like put those safeguards up to prevent it from getting too far away from the core offering?
Yeah, definitely. And I think relevancy is so important. So it's really good that a lot of the industry are now sort of talking about that and recognizing that. Because I know, we've all seen the examples of like brands where it just makes no sense for them to be talking about the story that are sort of being put out there. So yeah, I'm happy that a lot of the industry are now sort of talking that, and I suppose keeping that in mind when they're doing their content. That being said, I think the way we approach it, or the way I approach relevancy, is kind of a bit of common sense. So I think if there's any sort of question of why that brand would be talking about that topic, then that's kind of like an immediate red flag of like, okay, well, if someone would be questioning why you're talking about that topic, then maybe we shouldn't be talking about it. Went to a journalist panel recently, and they said a really interesting thing, which I think can be applied quite well to this, and it's kind of what I try and keep in mind when I'm thinking about relevancy. And it's that when she's looking at pictures in her inbox, this was a journalist from, I think it was Cosmopolitan. She said she thinks about the three whys. So first why is it interesting? So why is that thing, like, why should it be written about? Why are journalists going to cover it? The second thing is why now? And I think that's something that we perhaps don't always consider as much. Like, we're very obviously like aware and considerate of like why it would be interesting or why it's relevant for a brand to be talking about, but potentially not so much thinking about why would you write about it right now and not in the past or in the future. So I think that's really important to consider. And then why them? So in her context, she was sort of talking about it in terms of like, why would that publication specifically write about that piece of content? But I think obviously as PRs, we can really easily apply that to brands as well. So why would our brand basically be talking about? And I think if it doesn't hit all three of those things, then you probably don't have a very relevant story. And it's not likely to maybe get as much cut through as if it is ticking all three of those boxes. So yeah, I think thinking a lot about that sort of ideal customer, why the brand is the right person to be talking to the ideal customer about that thing, you're probably on the right tracks if it's kind of ticking those boxes there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So to reiterate it, why is it interesting?
Yeah.
Why now? And
Yeah.
why then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then as a brand, why me? Why
Yeah.
are we talking
Exactly.
about this? Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
do you apply this to like, obviously this can be most applicable for like if somebody is pitching a quote, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're CEO and you're talking about the auto industry, your auto insurance company, whatever. But for digital PR campaigns, say it's
Mhm.
like, we're in the auto industry and we're talking about the road trips or something famous, the best road trips to take, how long it take. Um, that I feel like is where it less probably applicable when you're talking about like the relevancy disconnect, or maybe less obvious, right? Like if
Mm.
you are pitching a quote, do you have any recommendations for people when thinking about the relevancy thing, or does it just get back to that, like, why me?
Yeah, I think the why me is a good core thing to come back to. I think as well, like, we're really lucky at PropellerNet. We work with, we have a whole strategy side of the business, who work with a lot of our clients on coming up with an overall strategy that all of that marketing sort of should sort of direct to. If they're not doing that via an agency, then they might be doing that internally. So it's really useful to talk to your client, I think, or talk to your business if you're in-house about like what that overarching strategy and message is, because once you have that, then it does sort of give you a nice sort of guideline and roadmap to stay within like the sort of lines of, as long as it's sort of answering that overarching sort of strategy, then it's probably okay. If it doesn't really sort of answer that, then again, maybe it's a red flag. Maybe you actually are going too far beyond that sort of realm of relevancy. So as an example, going back to the PR comparison business that we work with, their core offering is about scrapping cars, which is obviously quite niche. People tend to only do that once in their lives, if ever. So it's kind of a one-time thing for a lot of consumers. However, their overall sort of strategy as a business is to help people be better drivers, safer drivers, so that they don't have to end up with their cars in the scrapyard in the end. But if they do, then that business is there to sort of help with that. So a lot of our digital PR strategy is sort of centered around, yes, if there's relevant scrappage sort of topics that we can talk about, great, then that's like completely on the nose and brilliant. But if not, then we're sort of working to that overall strategy of trying to help people to be safer drivers, and trying to sort of give that advice and come up with creative concepts around that sort of, yeah, that idea of being a better and safer driver on the roads. So yeah, that's how I would kind of advise people to try and approach it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That connection there between the two. Um, do you ever have a client kind of push back where I just talked to James Bruckbank from Digital Ops about this, but like this idea that like our customer is everywhere, like for a scrapyard, it's like customer could be anyone. So like we should just create content like you guys could create content about anything because it's going to reach our customers. Like what does that conversation look like? Do you push back on a client? And like, I'm really curious about how different agencies approach that kind of question and line of thinking.
Yeah, I think it depends. It depends, SEO answer, on the client. Some clients are more protective of their brand than others, which is, totally understandable and fair. So typically with a lot of bigger brands, you have sort of their legal teams and their brand teams and their internal PR teams.
Mm.
You tend to get more pushback on those potentially broader topics, I would say, than those typically, which are smaller businesses. Having said that, I think, you know, I haven't had much experience, to be fair, which maybe is creds to PropellerNet, but haven't had much experience where we've pitched an idea and they've been like, no, this makes absolute like no sense for us to be talking about that. I think if, if it's still relevant to the brand and it's going to be adding value to their audience and the sort of readers that we're aiming to get coverage on, then I would argue that, that's still a good idea. And if it's going to get you, great coverage, if in a great link from a really high quality, relevant publication, then yeah, you've got the sort of grounds to push back on that. But also at the end of the day, you can understand why these sort of bigger brands are more protective about, what they're going to talk about and what they don't actually want to touch. So yeah, it kind of depends, which isn't a very helpful answer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was thinking more along the lines of like the other realm where it's like the brand doesn't really have strict guidelines. They don't really know, or care enough to
Yeah.
put those guidelines in place. And they're just like, go get me any links. Like, I don't care.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
as an agency, you've taken them on and you're realizing they have links from wherever. And you're kind of
Yeah.
having that conversation where it's like, you got to get more relevant. I'm just kind of curious what the thought process is there.
Yeah, I think in that situation, then yeah, conversations would definitely need to be had about why you're sort of putting out the content that you're putting out. I think actually, speaking of James Brockbank, he delivered a great talk at the Digital PR Summit a couple of months back, and talked about this idea of like, would you still want the coverage if Google wasn't a thing? And I do
Yeah.
think that's a really nice way to think about things, because actually, we're doing digital PR for SEO benefit, but there's a lot of sort of traditional PR benefit to what we do as well. So kind of explaining to those clients, like, yeah, we could get a DR80 piece of coverage and a link or whatever by doing any old thing. Actually, like in terms of good PR, is that actually like helping you? Probably not. And we sort of know that Google is getting more and more intelligent in terms of sort of understanding how relevant content is and how it relates to those sort of publications and tying back to the brand and stuff like that. So yeah, I think we would definitely step in if that were to happen and sort of put them back on to something that followed a coherent strategy and yeah, relevant
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Um, so we came a little far afield from one of the questions that I wanted to chat. So I'm going to kind of circle back to the kind of content ideation
Yes.
uh, portion where you had mentioned a couple of like tips for people of like how to ideate for these industries. Now, when you get into a position where you are starting brand new and you have a tough industry, you talked about talking to customer service, maybe just identifying some of these pain points, question, answer the public, like what are the questions that the customers are asking.
Mm.
Um, can you talk through some other strategies that you might have for coming up with content in a tough industry?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So yeah, I think the briefing side of things is really, really important. I think that's what helped my personal like ideation process to get sort of better and better over the years. And we're really lucky at PropellerNet, our creative director, Richard Paul, has like put together a really sort of cohesive process in terms of making sure that we've run through everything that you could possibly need to know basically before going into that initial ideation. So really prioritizing that time on research of, as I said sort of previously, looking into those audience insights and pain points, what the goals are for the campaign. So what's the message we're trying to send out with the digital PR work that we're doing? And then also making sure that we're having those related topics sort of there. So having almost like a mind map of like, okay, the core offering is this, but actually we can talk about this, about this, about that. And then we do also have a side of just like random topics. So literally like pets, Netflix, Disney, driving, like random things that you can then match up with the client's sort of core topics
Yeah.
so that you can try and start coming up with some ideas, coming up with some different concepts from there. So then at PropellerNet, we would run through this brief as a team. We would sort of come up with any initial thoughts and ideas, and then from there go away into sort of solo ideation. So for there, I think a lot of research is sort of key, particularly in those sort of trickier, more niche, more boring sort of industries. And just really getting your head into that world. So like, okay, if someone is scrapping a car, what is actually that journey? What are the different reasons why someone might be in the position that they're going to swap their car? What kind of driver are they? Like, are they a dangerous driver? And that's how they got there. So really sort of getting stuck into that whole sort of world and experience. And at that point, I would say I always try and do like a massive list of ideas of like the most awful ideas I could come up with about that topic, because you definitely come up with some like good insights and like concept, even if they're not fully formed, from that initial just like getting everything out onto a page, the most basic like
Yeah.
ideas that you can think about.
And what are we talking about numbers wise? How many bad ideas do you come up with?
Like
100? Like,
no, not hundreds. I'm not that
okay,
good.
okay,
No, but like 20, 25.
okay. That's in like
There's
the
many
initial
that
kind of
come
blue
to me.
skying, like,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Either
okay,
blue sky or like the most basic thing that's probably already been done and isn't even that
right,
interesting. Because you kind of then
yeah,
get to nail down what the key sort of core areas of like what you can explore are going to be.
yeah,
And then I would leave it and not think about it for a few days and then go back to it, come up with some new ideas, see if there's any builds on my rubbish first list, and then whittle down my favorites from then. And then at that point, we'd go back to the team, come together, collaborate on ideas, and sort of build on them, validate them out from there. So it's quite a long process, but I think getting the right idea, particularly for these, more tricky clients, is so key. It helps the rest of the process just be so much more easy. So it's definitely worth spending that time really getting into the nuts and bolts of it in the first place, and it will save you later down the line.
yeah. And you hit on something briefly there in the validation process. That was
Yeah.
the question I wanted to ask you about. How do
Yeah.
you validate whether an idea is going to work?
Yeah. So I think thinking a lot about the sort of 3 whys sort of concept. So thinking about, has it been done already? If it has in a general sense, then what are we kind of adding new to this conversation or to this concept? Why would the brand be talking about it? Why would the brand be talking about it right now? And we kind of have a general sort of process within the team where, like, if anyone has got any concerns, no matter how sort of small or seemingly insignificant, then they should flag at that stage, because actually there's lots of things when you're sort of in that ideation process, you've maybe worked with the brand quite closely or for a long time, that you actually miss, and you can't sort of spot those things that either, might cause some problems later down the line, or they might not be quite right for the brand right now. So I think we try and encourage people to sort of bring up those constructive worries and stuff like that, so that we can really sort of nail into getting the best ideas possible for clients. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I feel like the validation point there is like where I've seen most campaigns fail. It's like you have a great idea, your colleague thinks it's a great idea, your boss thinks it's a great idea, the client thinks it's a great idea, but then you go to do it and you're like, oh, this fell flat. Like what's
Yeah.
happening? Do you do any sort of like kind of postmortem on a on a project to kind of determine and use that going forward.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely 100%. And we tend to do that validation process before we've even presented the idea to the client. So before we present it to the client, we've got the data and the methodology sort of sorted. We've hopefully touched wood, sort of every single sort of possibility and angle within the story. So hopefully most of those ideas, it's quite rare that they actually get to the point of being signed off. Obviously, there's sometimes things that crop up in the data that we couldn't have foreseen, for example, or for some reason it just doesn't fly. But yeah, in those instances, we will meet with the client. We will sort of discuss the reasons why it didn't fly as we thought it would, and sort of take those as learnings into our next ideation. Although sometimes I do think in this industry, you just get campaigns which just don't perform and you have no idea why. And it's so confusing. So yeah, just one of those things sometimes.
Yeah, we've all been there, but I think, yeah, your advice is great. Like, communicate it with the client and
Yeah.
do what you can to make the next one better and safeguard it from
And
being done. So there are two things also you hit on there. So as you go to create the content and say you start getting data, maybe the data doesn't support your initial idea. What happens with that?
Then we would go back to the drawing board and see, I suppose it depends what the data is then saying, whether that's still a usable angle. If so, then we can sort of pivot the story, I suppose, to sort of align with what that's saying. If not, we'll go back to the drawing board and sort of see if there's another methodology that we could use to get the story that we're intending. But as I say, we have quite a rigorous validation process so that any idea that's getting to presentation stage has normally had like a bit of a sense check, a pre-data collection. So like most of the time we don't tend to experience any hiccups. If we do, and I think if that does happen and you're sort of in that position, I think honesty is like really appreciated by a lot of clients. If you just say like, we couldn't have foreseen this happening. We're suggesting this pivot, or we're going to try a new methodology. Or I suppose in the worst case scenario, you just sort of hold the campaign back and you don't do that. I think I've had that once or twice in my career so far, maybe, but there's no kind of point, I think, rushing ahead with a campaign that you're worried about not getting coverage, because actually it's no use for anyone. You're better off going out with something that you're super confident in, and know that's going to get the link. So yeah.
Right. Okay, then you also mentioned something cool that I thought was like in the ideation process of kind of throwing out kind of like random connectors, should say, I guess. Like one of the ways I like to ideate content is kind of like an equation where it's like core industry plus whatever,
Yeah, no,
equals there.
nice.
So like if we're in insurance and I know that eco market, green energy, whatever, like that's a linkable market. I like to
Yeah,
think about that. So it's like
yeah,
insurance plus eco-friendly equals, and you come up with content ideas that way. Sounds like
yeah.
you kind of have a similar process where like in that blue sky with like, you mentioned like Netflix and
Yeah.
some other kind of hot topic. I guess my question is, how do you come up with those? Like, what are those kind of hot topics to connect to?
Yeah. So for the first part, yeah, it's thinking about what the journalists are going to cover within those topics. So for example, for Netflix, we know that a format that covered a lot is like, okay, so Bridgerton's just come out. Don't know if you watch Bridgerton. I'm an avid fan. So that just came out. The press are going mad for it. So it's then thinking about, okay, what aspects of that new series can we link to our clients? So for a property client, is it that people are searching for moves to London because they've seen all these beautiful London palaces and now they want to move to London? Is it for an interiors client that people are searching for more traditional, beautiful, palatial sort of interior styles? All that kind of stuff. With sort of pets and like topics like that, I think it's just a bit more linear. So it's literally thinking about, okay, we've got an automotive client and we've got pets. What the link there? It's pets and cars. So could we go out with some advice around, pets and cars like that? So it kind of depends on that. But yeah, I think it's such a useful exercise for firstly sort of backing yourself up. So you've always got that secondary sort of angle, that secondary pool of media to go out to. And also really obviously useful for building those new linking domains as well. So yeah, really like that process of ideating, sure.
Yeah, I like that a lot as well. Sounds like when you do ideate for a client, you build this campaign where it's like, we're going to do maybe this kind of asset specifically and build links to that. But then we're
Mhm.
also going to have like supplementary campaigns where it's like, I'm just going to pitch this topic to a journalist just to get coverage. Like the pine needles one, for instance, like, I don't think that tied back to a specific, like how to do pine needles, but you knew like we could be an expert in this and comment on this. So is that kind of the approach, is like a few assets and then the rest is kind of supplemented with like expert commentary?
Yeah, kind of. And it does depend on the different tactics we use for different clients. But for our campaign work, so that's typically like the bigger execution. So it might be a big data study, it might be a creative stunt, yeah, an index, those types of things where there's like lots of different stories, lots of data, maybe a sign up page is needed. That's when we'll have the on-site content and we'll build those links back to that on-site content page. For what we call press office, which is, as you say, that sort of reactive stuff, the expert commentary, all that kind of stuff. We tend to build links to like product or category pages or home pages, with the thinking of like we'll either tie into a core product that the business wants to focus on, and sort of branch out from there. Sometimes brands do have great content already on their blogs, and that is how we do actually ideate for a lot of press office content, is looking at what's already on their site, because then the brand is going to be happy to talk about that topic. They've already got the content written up, so it's really easy to sort of repurpose that. And then in that instance, we can sometimes build links back to those blog pages as well. So yeah, that's how we tend to approach it.
Yeah, I like that kind of like the multi-pronged approach there to
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
So, okay. Uh, let's see. The other two things I really wanted to talk to you about was obviously the work in progress newsletter. I know it's not going right now, but I'm curious, and you mentioned this in the very beginning, of like you are always interested in what other people are doing. Um, how did you go about finding topics to put on the newsletter?
Yeah. So it's one of my favorite things to do, to be honest, is to just sit on the internet and browse cool stuff, to be honest. Like, I am a child of the internet. I grew
Genius,
up
right?
on, yeah, literally, it's so good. I've wasted so much time just like, yeah, looking at cool content. I grew up on Tumblr. Like, I am an internet millennial through and through. So yeah, I tend to look at some the same sort of websites a lot. So I love Visual Capitalist. I love Famous Campaigns. It's a great one, which I check like basically every day. Um, and then I sign up to a
That's
lot
a
of
website, or is that
yeah,
the headquarters? Oh,
famouscampaigns.com.
yeah, I don't know that one.
Yeah, it's a
Cool.
website. It's
Okay.
really great. I think it's a PR agency in the UK which actually collates that. Can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, really great sort of curated collection of famous campaigns from the PR world, advertising world, from the week. So yeah, I tend to look at a lot of different key websites. I sign up to a lot of newsletters as well, from different sort of PRs, but also like SEOs as well, because I think there's a lot to be sort of inspired by different like search trends and consumer trends and stuff like that. And then another big time waster, which actually is very useful in coming up with content and ideas, is TikTok. I
Mhm.
spend a lot of time on TikTok, but there's so much user generated content on TikTok about what people are talking about at the moment, the trends within different industries. There's just like a niche for everything on TikTok, which I love. So I spend a lot of time on TikTok just coming up with, yeah, different random ideas from that.
We might have to have a second podcast about that, because I don't know anything about
Yeah.
TikTok, and I know I got to get on there. I think for BuzzStream, I feel like there's probably some
Yeah,
digital PR stuff and tips I could be giving, and
definitely. Yeah.
yeah, it's a new world. Yeah, there's another one I was gonna see if do you remember Stumble Upon?
Yes. Oh my
It's like a
God.
web.
Yeah.
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 So
Yeah.
I just found there's a new one, like somebody remade it, called cloudhiker.net.
Ooh. Okay.
Um, yeah. And then the other one I was going to say is I see this on Instagram a lot, where people just sharing like things you didn't know, or like websites you didn't know
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. Yeah. I
There's a
love that.
couple like people that I follow specifically, and you always find really cool stuff on there.
Yeah, I love that. We also have a like an inspiration channel on our Slack channel where people just
Love it.
share random campaigns and like PR activations, or just like random websites, or like what's it called, the pudding. Do you follow the pudding? Like the
Yeah,
data
yeah.
visualization, things like that, that people share. So yeah, we get a lot from each other on the team of just being like, I love this. And like, we don't really tend to analyze why we love it. We're just like, yeah, I love that too. That's really cool. But I think it's important to be like
Yeah.
consuming stuff, because you don't know what you're going to return to when you get into an idea session. So I think just that consumption in general is really, really useful as a digital PR.
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's dive into that for the last few minutes. If you find a great campaign and you really like it, how do you connect the dots? I mean, you just said you don't necessarily analyze it, but like you may bring it into a campaign ideation meeting
Yeah.
or something. So like, how do you take something really cool that maybe even a competitor had done,
Yeah.
and how do you do it for your client or your site?
Yeah, 100%. Such an interesting topic as well. So I have like a document that I put all of my favorite pieces of content, PR activations, even headlines that I really like, I will put into just like one big, messy, chaotic doc. And then when I'm going back to a brief and like going into ideation, I will then return to that doc and basically see what I can replicate from whatever I liked about that. So I think like something that I was taught really early on in my sort of digital PR career or whatever was like, you're never going to come up with an original idea. Like no idea is original. It's always someone's had it before and you don't know, or it's always based on some like previous concept or format of that like core idea. So I think with like when I'm going into an idea session, I'm always trying to think like, okay, I really liked this campaign, for example. What can I extract this element of it and replicate it in my industry? Or could I do the same methodology, but with like a twist? Or what can I do to basically replicate the bit of that campaign that I like? So I think that's a really useful way to approach it. I think just looking as well at the general topics which tend to perform well with like audiences and journalists is a really useful way of finding those like associated topics that we were talking about with like hangovers
Yeah,
or
the
Netflix and stuff
Netflix,
like that.
yeah.
They tend to all have like a link, which is really interesting to sort of look back at when you're sort of spotting those patterns. So yeah, I think trying to like extract the best parts of each of your favorite things is quite a good way of then building on that to get to something new. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, super helpful. And I know I said that was the last question, but there was another thing I wanted to ask you too, because I think this is really interesting comparing the UK market to, well, the UK digital PRs, I should say,
Mhm.
versus the US digital
Mhm.
PRs. I feel like a lot of the UK people that are in the content creators or agency leaders like yourself do kind of promote your coverage, promote your great ideas and stuff on Twitter, on LinkedIn. I feel like that's not as common, I would say,
Mhm.
in the US. That was like something I was always like wary of doing. But it seems like, you know, A, like it's probably very beneficial, right? Because like then other
Yeah.
people share it, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like there's a built-in extra like outreach market or whatever you want to call it, where it's like a
Yeah.
digital PR newsletter and
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
content roundups that people share. Um, yeah, I just wanted to get kind of your take on why you think that's important. Because again, like I see you do that really successfully on Twitter.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it is important. Although interesting what you said about getting sort of an extra layer of validation. It is something we discuss a lot on the team of like, okay, we've come up with this really cool idea, but is it a cool idea that like the rest of the industry are going to love and no journalists are going to be interested in? Or is it something that's
Yeah,
actually going to be like cool to a wider audience? So I think that's definitely something that you can fall into the trap of being like, every other digital PR would be like, that is an incredible campaign, but actually journalists aren't picking it up. So it's important to keep that in mind. But yeah,
yeah.
it's so useful because I think the sharing in the community is like really, really lovely. And it does help with your campaign ideas, because at the end of the day, agencies are sharing that, piece of content, being like, oh, this is cool. How could we do this methodology for X? Or like, I really like how they've used a case study to get coverage for this client. Maybe we could look into that. So I think it's ultimately helping the industry like be better and grow. And then there's the obvious benefit of like, yeah, just shouting about our work, I'm really proud of the work we create at PropellerNet. So I think it's nice to be able to shout about it and share with people who are also interested in the sort of, work that we're producing. So yeah, very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a good message. Like, uh, being able to kind of contribute to this community of digital
Yeah.
PRs and like helping the industry itself grow. I know these days there's a little bit of trepidation with like the AI overviews kind of coming out. We're recording this basically like 3 or 4 days after Google, rolled
Yeah.
out the AI overviews, and people are
Yeah.
worried about, the value of links, the value of SEO in general. So like
Yeah.
whatever we can do as a community to kind of support each other and support the industry, I think we'll all be better for it.
Yeah, exactly. 100% agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Abby, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I have a laundry list of links and cool content to check out, so I'll be sure to share a lot of that in the show notes. And again, yeah, thanks, Abby Bennett, the digital PR director at PropellerNet. Thank you so much for joining.
Perfect. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. And listeners, watchers, if you like what you are seeing, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast. Goes out bi-weekly here at BuzzStream. So thanks again for listening and or watching.